For nearly 3 agonizing years, my own parents systematically dismantled my life, ensuring every job application I submitted ended in immediate rejection by telling managers I was a convicted felon. I had a completely spotless record, but by 27, I was sleeping in an overcrowded homeless shelter, washing up in public restrooms, and surviving on single meals. Every week like clockwork, my father sent a cruel text message stating I could come home and apologize if I wanted his campaign to end. Everything shifted on a rainy Tuesday morning when an unknown woman arrived at the shelter carrying a heavy leather briefcase, explaining that my late grandmother had hired her to find me before it was too late. My name is Hannah Vance, and growing up in the tiny town of Oak Creek, my family was viewed as the absolute pillar of our tight community. My father, Arthur, worked as an executive supervisor at the regional processing plant for decades, while my mother, Brenda, organized local charity drives every weekend. To anyone watching from the outside, we were a picture-perfect household, but behind our front door lived strict control and invisible boundaries. I was not permitted to own my house key until adulthood, and every paycheck I earned from working part-time was immediately deposited into a locked joint account my mother managed. When I graduated at the top of my high school class, my guidance counselor handed me full scholarship applications for prestigious state universities. My father tossed the paperwork into the trash, coldly stating that real work happened with hands rather than textbooks. So I remained trapped at home, cooking 3 daily meals, scrubbing floors, and managing the household while my father reminded me every evening that shelter and family were all a young woman required. For years I accepted that reality, believing that obedience was the only way to keep peace. Until the week after my 25th birthday, when a sudden wave of panic forced me to realize I was vanishing. Determined to build an independent life, I secretly walked to the town library and created my own private email address on a public terminal. I submitted an application for a stable administrative position at a medical office 20 miles away and secured an interview 2 days later. Walking into that office felt like taking my very first breath of fresh air, but the hiring manager quickly sat me down with a grim expression. He explained that a concerned relative had called earlier that morning to warn him about my extensive history of violent theft, leaving me standing in the parking lot in complete shock. Over the next 2 months, 6 different employers canceled my interviews at the very last minute, each offering vague excuses or avoiding my questions entirely. The truth finally surfaced when a sympathetic diner owner admitted that a woman had been calling every business in the county to claim I was a dangerous fraud artist. That night, I searched my mother's private desk and discovered a small leather notebook filled with every company name I had applied to, complete with red check marks beside each entry. Seeing my life systematically sabotaged in my mother's neat handwriting broke something deep inside my soul, leaving me breathless in the dark room. When I confronted both of my parents at the breakfast table the next morning, my mother immediately began crying, claiming she only acted to protect me from a cruel world. My father sat calmly buttering his toast, informing me that I lacked the basic skills to survive on my own and threatening to wipe out my savings if I walked away. True to his word, when I packed a single backpack and walked out into the night, I opened my banking app to discover my balance had been completely drained down to $0. They locked the door behind me, refusing to return my official identification documents or birth certificate. For months I lived in a crowded municipal shelter, sleeping on a thin metal cot and scrubbing kitchen floors in exchange for warm soup. Even from 30 miles away, my father managed to track my applications, escalating from phone calls to emailing fake police reports written on forged official letterhead. Every Sunday evening my phone would buzz with his cold reminders that the front door was open the moment I was ready to surrender and apologize. I saved every single message, storing them away like tiny shields, determined never to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down or return to his cage. During those dark nights listening to the hum of the shelter heaters, my mind kept drifting back to my grandmother, Clara Vance. She had passed away 2 years earlier, but right before she died, she pulled me aside on her farm and whispered that if things ever became unbearable, someone would come searching for me. At the time I thought she was simply sharing comforting words, but she explicitly mentioned that she had sold her property without spending a single penny of the proceeds. Sitting on my shelter bed, those forgotten words suddenly echoed in my mind, filling me with a strange sense of quiet hope. The mystery unravels when the shelter director handed me a business card left behind by a polite private investigator named Ruth Vance, who had been asking discreet questions about my whereabouts. Fearing it was another elaborate trap set by my father, I kept the card tucked deep inside my pocket for weeks without calling the number. However, the investigator had walked directly to the shelter front desk rather than hiding behind anonymous phone calls or forged documents. That subtle difference made me realize that whoever hired this woman was operating from a place of genuine care rather than calculated control and deceit. When I finally summoned the courage to meet Ruth at a quiet diner, she opened her briefcase and laid out a complete legal estate file alongside a brand new passport and birth certificate. She revealed that my grandmother had anticipated my father's controlling behavior decades ago, and had secretly placed the entire farm sale proceeds into an irrevocable trust meant exclusively for me. The legal documents contained strict clauses protecting the inheritance from my parents, ensuring I had total financial independence the moment I was located by the investigator. Ruth had spent months quietly tracking my steps, carefully cutting through the false records my parents had created. Standing outside the shelter with my essential documents and financial freedom restored felt like stepping into an entirely new reality that my parents could no longer touch. I used the resources to secure a quiet apartment, finish my education, and rebuild my life from the ground up without their shadow hanging over my shoulder. Looking back at those painful years of isolation, I realized that true family does not control or diminish your potential just to keep you dependent. My grandmother's foresight gave me the second chance I deserved, proving that light can find you even in the darkest and most hopeless places.